If you're a facilities manager at a university, you know students rely on the cafeteria for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the occasional late-night snack. So when a dishwasher breaks down and dirty plates pile up, the mess hall can turn messy in the blink of an eye. Enter Grainger. With over 1 million industrial-grade products and fast delivery, the product you need now is never far away. So you can turn that dishwasher back into a lean, clean washing machine. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
You're listening to Late Night Radio on the SHR Media Network. Caution, there will be mature themes explored and potentially adult language used. If conservatarian words, phrases, certain concepts, or rhetoric offends you, tune out now.
Guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody? Julie, hey, guess what day it is? Oh, come on, I know you can hear me. Mike. What day is it, Mike?
You magnificent bastard, I read your book. I drink your milkshake.
How dare you?
I call that bold talk for a one-eyed fat man.
Fill your hand, you son of a bitch!
Captain.
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 Captain. Captain. Captain.
Captain.
Captain.
Captain.
Captain.
Captain.
Captain. Captain.
Captain.
Captain. Captain. Captain.
No, not yet. Not yet. Don't pass out on me yet.
Of course you realize this means war. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to BZ's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show, where I am broadcasting behind enemy lines in occupied California. Always spell it with a K. A mere 2 miles east of the locus of evil on the entire left coast, the Bill Mill, the belly of the beast. The Capitol building in downtown Sacramento at 10th and L Streets, where late at night you can hear the death of common sense and its concomitant wail as it wafts from that putrefying edifice. And at the end of the show, when I exit the plush, resplendent, sumptuous, and palatial SHR Media studios, I'll be smelling the odoriferous stench of sulfur, brimstone, and evil emanating from that columned structure in downtown Sacramento. Be forewarned, what you're about to hear for the next 2 hours consists of my opinion and no one else's. But, of course, because of the fear porn that has gripped this nation, the saloon isn't open. Just want to tell you this, however, I am still serving stiff drinks, facts, history, logic, rationality, proportion, context, tradition, intent, and common sense out the back door. Also a reminder, we don't water our drinks just like we don't water our conversation. Politics, religion, crime, culture, economics, race, sex, science, law, we talk about it all right here at the Saloon, where the speech is free but the booze still is not. This is 2020, and I am done with any form of bipartisanship or compromise. This is the new age of modern political warfare, because, make no mistake, we are at war. It began with a soft coup against President Trump. It continues with the United States that appears to have lost its mind and is setting itself up for a couple of things, either utter capitulation or essentially what will perhaps end up to be the Second Civil War. If our Constitution, if our Bill of Rights don't prevail, we have absolutely lost this nation and it might not be coming back in our lifetimes. Because if we lose freedom here in the United States of America, where else are we going to find it around the planet? And I would postulate you're going to have a difficult time doing that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, I have a brand new guest tonight. And his appearance really couldn't be more timely, especially after listening to the debate and after a particular edict came down from on high. I'd like to welcome Alex EPSTEIN into the Saloon. He is the founder for the Center for Industrial Progress. So welcome tonight, Alex EPSTEIN.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Really appreciate your being here. I found you on social media, and I thought your appearance couldn't be better. Like I said, in light of the newest edict in the debate that just occurred, the Capitol building, the gentleman that sits there has issued his various edicts from on high. His newest bolt from Mount Leftimpus left no doubt whatsoever that his brain pan is firing on, I don't know, maybe about 2 of 20 wind turbines, and that his cerebral solar panels kind of are in desperate need of cleaning. He signed an executive order. We're going to be getting into that. But Alex EPSTEIN, thank you for being here tonight. We'll get that to that in a moment. Can you first tell us, however, you're the founder of the Center for Industrial Progress. So please, sir, what is that?
Sure. So that's an organization, as the name might suggest, that is championing industrial progress. And so industrial progress is really the improvement of human life and the human environment through industry, which means machine power. Basically, the only reason we have a high standard of living in much of the world is because we can use machines to improve our lives. Machines allow us to do far more work than we can do just by ourselves, and they allow us to do amazing types of work, things like power medical devices and power the internet or consist of the internet. And all of this depends on reliable, low-cost energy. So a lot of my focus is on reliable, low-cost energy as the fuel of industrial progress. And if you look around the world, you can think of it as maybe 2 billion people have anywhere close to the standard of living that we enjoy in the U.S., and there are 6 billion people who either use virtually no energy or very little energy compared to us. And I think there's a desperate need for more energy in the world, where most of the focus of most politicians is that we should be using less energy.
You wrote a book, and it's a very interesting one. Let me see if I the morals, or what's the name of the book? The moral
case for fossil fuels.
For fossil fuels. And at first, especially considering today, it seems a little counterintuitive. So the moral case for fossil fuels would suggest to me that likely you've been on the receiving end of a lot of arguments with regard to that. But I see your point. Maybe can you explain what your book is about?
Sure. So the moral case for fossil fuels, the idea of it is that the moral path forward for humanity is actually to use more fossil fuels versus the far less that most people are taught to think. And if you look at the presidential debates and discussions around the world, there's a very popular view that we should try to rapidly eliminate fossil fuels. Certainly the basis of all of Joe Biden's plans. That's the basis of the Green New Deal. That's the basis of a lot of things advocated under the auspices of the UN, different kinds of corporate proposals to go net zero, different proposals to go 100% renewable. And my view is that that's all the wrong direction. And I gave a part of the reason just a second ago, which is that the world needs far more energy if people are to have modern, prosperous, healthy lives. Again, only 2 billion people in the world use anywhere near the amount of energy that we in the U.S. are able to use. So the world is really energy starved. And the only way the world is going to become more abundant in energy is if we have sources of energy that are reliable, low cost, and that can scale to billions of people. And if you look at just the state of the alternatives right now, there's nothing that can come close to fossil fuels, which is oil, coal, and natural gas, particularly for things like transportation, particularly for what's called industrial process heat, which is involved in things like steel making. Just fossil fuels are so far ahead in terms of their ability to produce reliable, low-cost energy for billions of people that to not use them and even to not increase them will dramatically hurt billions of people. So when you're looking at the concerns about fossil fuels, things like rising CO2 levels, you need to look at those, but you need to consider them side effects and weigh them against the benefits of fossil fuels. And I think the benefits of using fossil fuels going forward far outweigh the side effects. And if we do anything close to rapidly restricting, let alone eliminating fossil fuel use, then the world will be a much, much worse place for billions of people.
Okay, the book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any other places where you would customarily acquire books. The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. We're talking to Alex Epstein tonight. And I watched your video on YouTube, The Best of Alex Epstein. My first thought was, okay, so where did this guy come from? And you are, compared to me, a pretty young guy. You're kind of like the anti-millennial. So where did you come from? You seem to be a lone voice in the midst of other voices doing their level best to attempt to drown you out. So where did you come up with this?
So I am a millennial, I guess. I was born in 1980, so I'm 40 years old now. I grew up in a liberal place called Chevy Chase, Maryland, which is in the Washington, D.C. area, and I went to Duke University, where I learned nothing positive about fossil fuels, and I have no family in the industry, and I didn't even know anyone in the industry when I came up with my ideas. I think what's different about my perspective is I come from a philosophy background, and so I'm very interested in thinking logically about things. And one area where I think people don't think logically about this issue is that they don't really look at both the benefits and the side effects of fossil fuels versus the alternatives. People tend to only look for negative side effects and ignore benefits when it comes to fossil fuels, and they tend to only look for benefits and ignore negative side effects when it comes to solar and wind. And so that kind of bias really bothered me once I started getting interested in energy. And I became really interested in, okay, if you look at the full context, if you weigh carefully the benefits and side effects of the various alternatives, what's actually the best now and likely to be the best in the future? And that's what led me, or part of what led me, to a much more positive evaluation of fossil fuels than I expected to have.
So, Alex Epstein, I have heard you say that you believe in climate change, but there's a lot more of it than just that in terms of climate change. So that led me to say, okay, do you firmly believe in anthropogenic climate change in terms of, for those not familiar, that's man-made climate change? How big an influence do you think that is on climate change itself?
Well, I think the important question is how significant, if at all, is man-made, what we can call climate impact on human life. Because the way it's usually framed is that if we have any impact on climate, if fossil fuel use has any impact on climate, then it must be bad and that we should stop fossil fuels. But that's like saying with antibiotics, like, if antibiotics have any side effects, then they must be catastrophic and we should stop using antibiotics. So no, you have to carefully weigh the benefits and the side effects. So my main issue with the climate issue is people tend to not look at benefits along with it, and they tend to assume that it's bad and that it's catastrophic, versus if you look at the nature of what's probably going on with CO2, I do believe that rising CO2 levels have some climate impact, but it tends to be a warming impact, and it tends to be what's called a decelerating warming impact. So every new molecule of CO2 you put up there warms, but it warms less than the last. So it's not like you keep doubling, if you double your CO2, you double the warming, and then you double it again, and then it doubles. It's much less dramatic than that. And if you just think about, okay, the world is going to get a little bit warmer, well, that's what most people in the world want. So it's really weird to me. It was really weird to me that people just assumed that if we change climate, that it must be bad, and then it must be all bad, and it must be catastrophic. And I think that's really a religious perspective. And I sometimes call it the delicate nurture dogma, And it's the idea that nature unchanged is a delicate nurture, so it's sufficient, it gives us what we need, it's safe, it's going to take care, it's not going to harm us, it's stable, it's not going to change too much. But then if we impact it, then it's just going to become some sort of devil planet or hell. And in reality, nature is not a delicate nurture. I think of nature as wild potential. So it has the potential to be a really good place to live. But naturally, it's wild. It's actually deficient. It doesn't give us enough resources. It's dangerous. It's dynamic. And so we need to impact it a lot intelligently. And that's a lot of what energy and machines allow us to do. They allow us to impact the planet in a much more positive way so that instead of scrounging for food, we have all these amazing modern farms powered by just a small percentage of people. Instead of being terrorized by the climate, we have these amazing, sturdy climate-controlled buildings. We have modern drought relief. Instead of spending all of our time, trying to get our food, trying to get some sort of decent water, and trying to get some sort of basic protection from the elements and from predators, we have huge amounts of opportunity to do whatever we want with our lives. So that's only because we have abundant machine power, and that comes from reliable, low-cost energy. So I totally disagree with the whole perspective that nature is this delicate nurture and that our impact is bad and it must be catastrophic. If you look overall at our impact on nature, just in terms of climate, if you actually tally how many people die from climate, like from extreme heat, extreme cold, storms, floods, that's actually what's called climate-related deaths. Those have gone down by a rate of 98% over the last century, which means we're way safer from climate than we used to be as we've used more fossil fuels, let alone everything else that's gotten better. So what's actually happening is fossil fuels are making the world a much better place to live, and trying to get rid of them would make the world a much worse place to live.
Folks, we're talking to Alex Epstein tonight. He's the founder of the Center for Industrial Progress. And the book, one of a couple of books that he's written, is The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. You mentioned something about religion, and I've called these people for a while religious leftists. We cannot allow science to not be mentioned, and the one thing that seems to be a common thread amongst the things that I've been reading of you is science and statistics. I need to ask you this question because some people, and they tend to be on the left, say something similar to, the science is the science, it's done, it's ended. Well, the BBC already said that. The science is done, it's ended, there is no further discussion. But it would seem to me, Alex Epstein, that I can go, climatedepot.com or any other number of places, and for roughly every article that is touting global warming and we're all going to hell, I can almost find another article indicating essentially the opposite. So it seems as though, and let me ask you this, is the science final? Is it immured? Or must we say something similar to, you know what, it's ever-changing and it's kind of fluctuous?
Yeah, I think the whole thing around science is misframed because what science is really specialized knowledge about different fields. So the question is, with the question of what should we do about energy, specifically fossil fuels, there are a bunch of different quote-unquote scientific issues that need to be considered. So one is, what's the nature of our impact on climate? But another huge one is, how does energy affect human life? And what's the ability of fossil fuels versus alternatives to provide reliable, low-cost energy to billions of people? And when people say the science is settled, one huge portion of that is they're just looking at this question of, do fossil fuels impact climate? But they're not precise about how significant the impact is, because there's a huge amount of debate over that. And they don't talk at all about the benefits of fossil fuels. So it'd be like people saying, oh, the science is settled, antibiotics have side effects. Okay, but that's not really a precise idea, even if it's true. Okay, yeah, most people believe they have side effects, but what are the benefits and how significant are the side effects? So the whole relying on science, but using that is just this dogmatic thing that is an excuse for not thinking about the full context. I actually think if you look at the facts in every different field, I think the science is settled that fossil fuels are good, because the benefits of energy are so huge and fossil fuels are so superior at their ability to generate energy at with reliability and low cost for billions of people. And the side effects of fossil fuels on climate are so manageable. That's why we've been increasing CO2 in the atmosphere for 170 years. And our climate safety has dramatically improved. So the thing that they're supposedly causing a problem with is getting better. So I think science has settled that fossil fuels are making the world a much better place. When people say the science has settled that humans have an impact on climate, okay, I'm willing to agree with that. But for me, that's just part of the big picture, that they're overall a huge benefit for human life.
Alex Epstein, would you be willing to take a couple of phone calls or two if people happen to call in?
Sure. I just want to make one comment in case we don't get to it, that
sure.
We're talking about elections and whatnot. There's a resource I've created recently called energytalkingpoints.com, and I would just really encourage people. I wish that the candidates had looked at this resource in tonight's debate. It would have been a lot better on energy and economy, but it's called energytalkingpoints.com, and it's got really quick, powerful, and true talking points backed up by really good references on all of these different issues. So if people are interested in that, definitely check that. And also, if anyone is interested in my views more broadly, they can go to the website industrialprogress.com and sign up for our mailing list.
Okay, I've just put that into the chat room, so it came out as a URL, folks, if you're in chat. Energytalkingpoints.com. So the number is right there. Or, excuse me, the URL is right there. Folks, if you want to come in and call Alex Epstein. The number is open at 575-208-4481. 575-208-4481. So, Alex Epstein, why can't people seem to agree that the most immediate, the most cost-effective, the most consistently reliable, and I think consistency is a major issue with regard to energy, the most easily accessible, at least in the United States, those solutions revolve around fossil fuel. Why can't people understand something that, to me, seems pretty obvious?
Well, I don't think it's obvious what sources of energy are going to be the most cost effective, as they generate the most value, including reliability, which, as you mentioned, is crucial for the lowest cost. You don't inherently know that. And I think sometimes people have the idea that, oh, well, the sun and the wind, they're free, right? We don't have to pay for them, so that must be cheap. And well, unfortunately, our whole education and media systems just totally fail on this. I mean, really, one thing to get about the price of energy is that energy is always a process. So when you're looking at the cost of solar or the cost of fossil fuels, you have to look at the cost of the whole process. You can't just say, oh, sunlight is free, that's nice. You have to look at the cost of the land. You have to look at the cost of all the different equipment to harness it, to bring it from location to location. And particularly with the sun and the wind, you need to look at the cost of how do you take an unreliable input like sunlight and wind, and how do you make it reliable? And that's where you end up having the massive cost. Because it turns out batteries are way, 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 way too expensive to store a lot of the stuff. So you end up just relying on reliable power plants, mostly fossil fuel plants. And what happens then is you don't get rid of the fossil fuel plants by adding this solar and wind. You just have a lot of wasteful duplication. And that's why the more solar and wind people use, the higher their electricity prices are. And then if they try to get rid of some of the reliable power plants, like we've done in California, then what happens is they have to import it from other places. But then if that's not available, we have blackouts like we've had recently. So these solar and wind, I don't call them renewables, I call them unreliables. And they're not replacing costs on the grid. They're adding costs to the grid.
And that's exactly the opposite of what we're told, what we're instructed, yes. and how we as a people are demeaned in the United States if we come to even begin that sort of a discussion. Now, you mentioned California, if I'm not mistaken, Alex Epstein, you live in California somewhere, in Southern California, I would guess. Okay, so I posit this. I say California exists as the veritable petri dish of what not to do as a state in the United States. And the most recent example is if we go back to October of 2019, here's an example of what happened. My wife and I we were going to go for a nice vacation on the coast. And in October of 2019, PG&E, which is the electrical provider, a big electrical provider in California, decided that they were going to activate what they call a PSPS, a public safety power shutoff. So we stayed one night. It became obvious, we found out in the media, that this is going to be extended. So I had to figure out how to take care of my family, go fill up the SUV with fuel, because we were only going to stay overnight. We woke up the next morning with no power in this little town. Everything was out because they're on PG&E. What people don't realize behind this is de rigueur. Now, in California, always spell it with a K. Gas pumps don't work. The electric motors pumping from the underground don't work. Air conditioners and heaters don't work. The restaurants in town all close. The motel doesn't have a microwave. I don't have a microwave. How am I going to eat? We don't have any light. Can I get any candles? What's the point of even being there? That's standard now. But the deal of it is, then, we had Gavin Newsom from on high declare that by 2035, California is going to, by fiat, I suppose, be completely emissions-free. All vehicles in California by 2035 will be emissions-free. And then there'll be a 10-year exemption for big trucks, delivery trucks, and semis, et cetera, to 2045. So as we're living, Alex Epstein, in California, in Southern California, in Los Angeles this summer, we have Mayor Garcetti telling people in 2020, turn off their appliances. Now, we know there are roughly 17 million cars in California. Gavin Newsom isn't building any more dams, no more reservoirs. You mentioned he took one down. If I'm not mistaken, and you correct me, please, sir, he took down Diablo Canyon because it was nuclear.
Well, he's planning on that's scheduled. San Onofre plus a bunch of gas plants got taken off.
So, to my knowledge and yours, then Governor Gavin Newsom must have a massive infrastructure plan in place in order to go hog wild on building electrical generation stations, doesn't he?
No, there's no plan whatsoever for any new reliable power. And as you mentioned, or as you indicated with Diablo Canyon, they're planning on shutting it down soon. So the most obvious thing that's been picked up on, although not enough, is the fact that we can't even produce electricity reliably, and then we're going to turn our transportation, which is a huge percent of our energy, into electricity, and we're going to be dependent on that. So in addition to all those other consequences when there's a blackout, which there would be way more of, we'll be immobile as well. So that's kind of the obvious thing, which is just, okay, you'd think there's the least leg to stand on right now. But the broader thing is this is dictatorship. I mean, what is going on where somebody just by executive order saying, because it's something like, he said something to the effect of, this is a moment that requires leadership. So you just feel like, quote, leadership is necessary. So you get to tell people you cannot choose what kind of car to drive. And just because you feel that way, and then you come up with this thing that makes no sense about how if we drive these allegedly emissions-free vehicles, which are mostly going to be produced by fossil fuels and powered by fossil fuels anyway, but if we use those, then somehow we're going to be safer from climate when China and India are building hundreds of new coal plants, and there's going to be rising CO2 levels no matter what. Like, the whole process of law has to be, there's deliberation. You actually have to be able to prove that there's some harm that you're going to avert, which they can't do at all. You have to weigh that harm against the harm that's going to be inflicted by your policy. They haven't done that at all. And so this is just the move of a dictator. And it just shows like how far away we've gone from freedom. And so the fact that it's particularly idiotic just shows that's just one reason why dictatorship is evil. Because instead of leaving people free to make their own decisions, one person can make decisions, including idiotic decisions, for everyone else, and then enforce them at the point of a gun.
Well, that's essentially true, which he's done on any number of issues. Folks, I want to remind you of this. I'm not going to take the full break right now. You folks are...
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
We're talking to Alex Epstein, and I have somebody on the phone. Would you be willing to take a phone call, sir?
Sure. Yeah, I only have a few more minutes in general, but I'm happy to talk to anyone.
Okay.
As long as I'm here.
All righty, great. Thank you. Caller, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone. This is Simone.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being on BZ's show, because this whole climate change thing, in fact, you covered a lot of what I was going to ask. The governor said that all these fires were due to climate change, and then they caught a whole bunch of arsonists, and then he just passed this by fiat, this thing where we're all going to be driving electric cars when they don't even have enough charging stations. And you can't, with an electric car, you can't just go to the pump and fill up and then you move on. It has to sit there for quite a while. So, are other states as stupid as California?
Okay.
Yeah, so I think this gets to a broader issue, which is that you have certain places like California and potentially the U.S. and definitely certain places in Europe that are making these commitments to try to rely on unreliable energy sources, namely solar and wind. And the EV mandates are part of that, but the EVs would be a hell of a lot better if we had buildup of reliable energy. EVs could be a superior alternative at some point in the future. They're not right now, but you'd have to have a lot of cheap power from natural gas, from nuclear, from coal, and then it might make sense to electrify everything. But they're saying, let's make our electricity more and more dependent on reliable solar and wind. Now, so California is really, they think of themselves as being a leader, or we think of ourselves as being leaders, but we're really suckers, and we've seen that with the blackouts. And we see that, and you think about China and India building combined hundreds of new coal plants right now. They're not falling for this. So what they're going to do is they're going to have low-cost, reliable energy there. They're going to get more industry over there. And to some extent, to a large extent, they're very happy if we're suckers and we drive our industries out of business, just like is increasingly happening in Europe. In terms of the wildfires, this is a perfect example where it's complete irrationality. Even if it was true that the dominant cause of this is rising CO2 levels, or even a major cause of it is rising CO2 levels, what are you going to do about that? How does mandating EVs in 2035, how is that an effective action? Whatever its cause, you have the obligation to do whatever is possible to alleviate the situation, including having rational forest management instead of having this massive fuel load buildup, which is not only a cause, is the major cause. So instead of dealing with the real issue that you have control over, which is the fuel load, they're starting to do a little bit, but they're not taking responsibility for the fact that the overwhelming cause of this problem is just that you allow fuel to build up out of control in the forests. And then when you have these ignition events, including deliberate arson, then they just get these super hot, super dangerous fires. I just think the whole thing is totally irrational because they're offering this incredibly destructive non-solution, and they're completely evading the constructive solution that doesn't involve restricting people's energy use. It involves actually, doing controlled burns, actually clearing the forests, actually logging, actually engaging in rational forest management. So it's just another instance where California and Newsom in particular are just doing these incredibly self-destructive things and really just taking advantage of the fact that we have such a beautiful state and that people will tolerate a hell of a lot of irrationality and stay here.
Well, it goes a bit further than that because, as with ISO, they have to tell certain producers of electricity that they're expecting a certain demand. You cannot store electricity. You can't store it. Like fossil fuel, you could store it, then when you need it, you could use it. You could store it over the winter, you could put additives, you could do all kinds of things to it. But electricity, so you have your solar cells, so you have your wind turbines. If everything was working and the sun was out, there's no way of storing it. And so that's like the biggest flaw with doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the reliability. So it's not that, you make a really good point. In terms of electricity, the modern grid is this amazing thing where pretty much whatever we need when we need it, we can get it. And demand is always changing. It's going up and it's going down. And when you have these reliable stored sources of energy like natural gas and coal and nuclear, you can scale them up and scale them down as necessary. But when you're relying on the sun and the wind, sometimes you have more than you want. Sometimes you have less than you want. It's a total mess. And that's why I mentioned before, they're totally parasitical on the reliable power plants. And so what they're adding is just a lot of duplication and a lot of chaos. And it's if people are interested in this, by the way, there's that website, energytalkingpoints.com, but also if people go on youtube.com/improve the planet, I have my podcast there, Power Hour, and we go into a lot of detail on these unreliables.
Simone, did you have another question?
Thank you. No, that was it. Thank you so much for BZ for having him, and thank you for putting his information here in chat so I can do some more reading, because I really like what he has to say. Finally, someone with some sense.
Great.
All right, thanks, Simone.
Thank you, Simone. Appreciate it. Do you have time for 2 more questions, sir?
Let's say one more question.
Okay. Here's one from the chat room. And Sergeant Booker in the chat room says, where does the environmental impact on manufacturing the batteries for these electric cars, how does that come into play?
Well, I don't think it comes to play in most people's thinking, unfortunately, because we're taught not to think of the full process involved in energy. We're just taught to think, oh, sun, wind, those are nice, and then batteries, those sound nice too. But yeah, what he's getting at is there's massive mining operations necessary for these batteries. It involves a lot of high toxicity materials, some of which we're not even allowed to mine in the U.S. And so often it's happening in very poor places with very bad environmental practices, sometimes child labor, borderline slave labor. I talk about this a little bit in, I think, forgetting which chapter of my book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. But it's an important point. I'm not against batteries at all. I think batteries can be great, but we need to look at the full context for all of these things. We can't just look at the negatives of fossil fuels and then just look at the positives of solar, wind, and batteries. And when you start to look at the full process for all of these, you get a much fuller picture of what's going on. If you have one more question, I'm happy to answer that, since that was a brief answer.
Okay. What about this for a final question? Why is it that energy independence in the United States is a bad thing? There are blood diamonds, conflict diamonds. I've called this for years. Middle Eastern oil is blood oil. It's conflict oil. Why, as a nation, if for no other reason than in terms of security, national security, why wouldn't we want to be energy independent?
Well, I think the argument's usually waged saying, well, fossil fuels have all these incredible environmental consequences, and we can just rapidly replace them with solar and wind, and then those are also viewed as domestic. And so I just challenge all of those things. I don't agree that there are these disastrous environmental consequences. There are some environmental challenges with climate. I don't think it's a problem at all, because our adaptive ability is so much greater than any change that we're making, any negative change that we're making, certainly. So I just don't think that's a real issue, as much as people want to focus on it. It's just we're becoming safer and safer from climate. So how can it be an existential crisis? And then in terms of replacement by solar and wind, that's just not true. These unreliables can't replace the reliables. As I keep mentioning, energytalkingpoints.com has a lot of the details about that. And then in terms of the being domestic, it's just not at all true that solar and wind are produced domestically. Most of these materials are produced in places like China. There's a lot of vulnerability there that I don't think people are thinking about. I'm all for international trade for everything. We just need to be objective about what the trade actually looks like. And it's just a delusion to act like these solar panels and wind turbines are being mined here and manufactured here, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of them are being produced using a huge amount of coal and oil and some unethical practices in China. And so that's just the fact of the way that it exists. And so if you, from an energy security standpoint, fracking is just incredibly crucial. Fracking is involved in 60% of American oil production, 75% of American natural gas production. To get rid of that, as people are talking about, would just be absolutely catastrophic for the U.S. and even for the world. It's just an incredibly beneficial technology, and it's part of this story that we're not told. We're taught that, fracking is making the world worse, it's polluting our groundwater. That's not true. Fracking is making the world a lot better because it doesn't cause any more pollution problems than anything else, but it's giving tons and tons of reliable, low-cost energy to millions and millions of Americans that are making our lives better. And just one final point that's relevant, I talk about on energytalkingpoints.com, energy poverty. There are tens of millions of people who really struggle to pay their gasoline bills, their electricity bills, their home heating bills. And the more expensive we make gas, gasoline, electricity, the more hardship those people experience. And in places like the UK, you see increased deaths, not in the summer, but in the winter, because it's still a really cold world. And when people can't afford to heat their homes, they die a lot more than they die from heat. Sometimes there are stories even of people freezing to death with these terrible, terrible policies. So just overall, fossil fuels are so important for life. The benefits so far outweigh the side effects. There are billions of people who need more of them. And so that's why I say the world needs more fossil fuels, not less.
Alex Epstein, I know you got to go. I thank you ever so kindly for your time tonight. If there are future energy issues, would you mind coming back to the Saloon in the future should some of those issues arise?
Yeah, if I can make it, and always just feel free to shoot me an email, and I can at least refer you to a good source. Yeah, happy to come on again, though.
Okay. Also, please, Alex Epstein, tell folks